My name is Lisa. I'm 60 years old, and what I'm about to tell you today will forever change the way you see your own family. Just 3 days ago, my own daughter, Demiana, and my son-in-law, Michael, pushed my husband, Henry, and me off a 90-foot cliff. As I lay there broken and bleeding, I heard my husband's desperate whisper, "Lisa, don't move. Lay bed." But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst was when Henry revealed the most terrible truth a mother could ever hear, a secret our children had kept for 25 years. For 4 decades, Henry and I built what we thought was the perfect family. We woke up every morning in our little suburban home, where the smell of fresh coffee mingled with the sound of birds singing. I worked as a teacher at the local elementary school, and every afternoon I came home with stories of my young students. Henry had his carpentry shop, where he created the most beautiful furniture you've ever seen. His hands, rough yet delicate, could transform a simple piece of wood into a work of art. We had 2 daughters, Rachel, our firstborn, and Damiana, 5 years younger. Rachel was the soul of the house, always laughing, always helping her father in the shop, always shielding me from any worries. Damiana was different, more reserved, but I loved her with the same intensity. As a mother, you never play favorites, or at least that's what I thought. On Sundays after church, the whole family would gather around our oak table, which Henry had carved with his own hands. Rachel would tell us her plans to study engineering, while Damiana would remain silent, just picking at the food on her plate. Life was simple but beautiful. In the evenings, Henry and I would walk the trail around our small town, talking about our dreams, how we'd watch our grandchildren grow, how we'd grow old together in that very house. I never imagined those walks were training for the one that almost killed me. On weekends, I'd host family gatherings where my sisters, Harriet and Irene, would come with their husbands and children. The house would fill with laughter, kids running everywhere, women sharing recipes in the kitchen while the men fixed something in the yard. Henry was my perfect partner. After 40 years of marriage, he still brought me wildflowers he'd pick on the way to work. He helped me grade my students' tests, and I would hold pieces of wood for him while he cut them in his workshop. We were a team, an unbreakable unit. Or so I thought. At night, we'd sit on the porch to watch the stars, planning our future. We talked about traveling when we retired, seeing the ocean for the first time, building a smaller house once our kids started their own families. But perfect happiness, as I would discover years later, often hides the deeper tragedies. When Rachel turned 20, something changed in our family. She began to argue with Demiana about things I didn't understand. I'd hear them whispering in the hallway, and they'd fall silent when I appeared. Henry told me it was just sisterly stuff and that it would pass. I wanted to believe him because I needed to believe my family was still perfect. One night in October, exactly 25 years ago, Rachel didn't come home for dinner. We waited until 11, then 12, then 1 in the morning. Damiana was in her room supposedly studying, but I noticed something strange in her eyes whenever I asked about her sister. Henry went out to search for her with our neighbors. They checked every corner of town, every trail, every place Rachel used to go. At dawn, they found her body at the bottom of the river gorge. The police said it was an accident, that she had probably stumbled in the dark. I never questioned that version because I couldn't imagine that the truth was much more horrible. Rachel's funeral was the darkest day of my life. I wore my only black dress, the same one I'd worn at my mother's funeral. Damiana was strangely calm for someone who had just lost her older sister. While I cried until I had no tears left, she remained silent, with an expression that now, after what I know, sends shivers down my spine. Henry never left my side all day, holding me up when my legs gave out, whispering words of comfort that I now know tasted bitter in his mouth. After Rachel's death, Damiana changed completely. She became more attentive, more loving, as if she were trying to make up for something. She helped me with chores, accompanied her father to the workshop, and brought me little gifts when she saw I was sad. I thought it was her way of dealing with grief, of filling the void Rachel had left behind. How naive I was! What she was really doing was building a perfect mask to hide the monster inside. The years passed, and the wound never fully healed, but we learned to live with it. Damiana married Michael, a charming man from the next town over, and they seemed happy. They had 2 beautiful children, and I finally felt like life was giving us a second chance at happiness. Michael called me Mom and helped me around the house when they visited. Damiana had inherited her father's talent for carpentry and had her own business. Everything seemed perfect again. But now, lying at the bottom of this gorge with my ribs broken and the metallic taste of blood in my mouth, I understand that all that happiness was a carefully constructed lie. The first signs that something was wrong began 6 months ago when Henry and I decided to update our will. We had saved our entire lives, and between the house, the land I inherited from my parents, and our bank savings, we had nearly $200,000 to leave our children and grandchildren. It was Damiana who suggested we visit the lawyer. Mom, Dad, you're both 60 years old now. It's important to have everything in order, she told us with that smile that now seems sinister. Michael would nod beside her, stroking my hand with those fingers that would later push me to my death. We love you so much, and we want to make sure you're protected, he added in his smooth voice. How foolish I was to interpret those words as genuine love. The lawyer, an older man named Albert, whom we had known for years, explained the options. We could put everything in a trust, divide the inheritance among Damiana's children, or simply make a traditional will. Damiana insisted on naming her and Michael as our sole heirs, arguing that they would handle the equitable distribution to the grandchildren. Besides, she said, you're going to need us when you're older. It's better for us to have access to the resources to take care of you properly. Something in her tone made me uncomfortable, but Henry seemed convinced. My husband, who had always been more trusting than me, accepted the proposal without much resistance. I had my doubts, especially since I remembered how Rachel had always talked about helping us financially when we got older. My oldest daughter had plans, dreams of taking care of us when the time came. But Rachel was gone, and Damiana was our only surviving child. We signed the papers on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember Michael was wearing a crisp white shirt and gave me a big hug after the ceremony. Now we're officially a united family forever, he whispered in my ear. His words gave me a chill. Then, though I didn't understand why, Damiana shook her father's hand with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. That night, as I made dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had made a terrible mistake. The following weeks were strange. Damiana and Michael started visiting us more often. But their visits had a different feel. They no longer came just to spend time with family. They always had suggestions about how we should improve the house, what investments we should make, or what life insurance policies we should get. Mom, you should think about selling this big house and moving somewhere smaller, Michael said while examining our furniture with calculating eyes. We could help you find a comfortable apartment in town. But I loved our house. Every corner held a memory. Every room told a story of our 40 years of marriage. The kitchen where I had prepared thousands of meals for my family, the workshop where Henry created his masterpieces, the yard where our children and grandchildren had played. I couldn't imagine my life anywhere else. When I told them this, I saw a flicker of irritation in Damiana's eyes that chilled me to the bone. Mom, you're being irrational, she said in a tone she had never used with me before. This house is too big for 2 people your age. If you fall down the stairs or something happens, we won't be able to help you in time. Michael nodded vigorously, adding, besides, the upkeep must cost a fortune. It would be much smarter to sell now while the housing market is high and move to something more appropriate for your age. Henry began to consider their arguments. My husband, who had always been practical, started talking about the logic behind their suggestions, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more behind all this pressure. One night, after another of these tense conversations, I asked Henry if he didn't think it was strange that Damiana was suddenly so interested in our financial affairs. "Lisa, she just cares about us," he replied while brushing his teeth. "Maybe we should consider her suggestions. We're not as young as we used to be." But I saw something in my husband's eyes, a shadow of doubt he didn't want to acknowledge. Now I know that Henry already had his suspicions, that he had started to connect the dots I didn't even know existed. Things escalated when Damiana suggested we give her power of attorney over our finances. "It's just for precaution," she explained while Michael prepared tea in our kitchen as if he owned the place. "If one of you gets sick or has a health issue, we can manage your affairs without legal complications." The way she said it, so naturally, so logically, it almost convinced me. But there was something about her insistence that made me nervous. I couldn't sleep that night. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to Henry's breathing beside me, trying to understand why I felt so uneasy. The next day, I decided to call my sister Harriet for advice. Harriet had always been sharper than me, more suspicious of people's intentions. When I told her about Damiana's pressure, she was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "Lisa, doesn't it seem strange to you that Damiana is so anxious to control your money? I mean, she has her own business. She's doing well financially. Why would she need so much control over your finances?" Her words hit me like a slap. She was right. Damiana had never seemed to have financial problems, had never borrowed money, had never shown any signs of needing our financial help. That afternoon, when Damiana came for another of her talks about our future, I decided to confront her directly. "Daughter," I said as we sat in the living room, "why is it so important for you to have control over our financial affairs? Your father and I are still in our right minds." Her reaction was immediate and telling. Her face hardened, and for a moment, I saw something in her eyes that reminded me of someone else, something cold, calculating, and dangerous. "Mom, it's not about control," she responded in a tense voice. "It's about love, care, and family responsibility." But the way she said family responsibility sounded more like a threat than an expression of affection. Michael, who had been silent until then, intervened with his smooth but firm voice. "Lisa, we just want what's best for you. It's painful to see you worry about things we could easily handle." That night, after they left, Henry and I had our first serious argument in years. He thought I was being paranoid, that I was looking for problems where there were none. I insisted something wasn't right, that our daughter's behavior had changed too much. "Henry," I said as we washed the dishes, "do you remember what Damiana was like before Rachel died? She was different, more distant. I don't know how to explain it, but there was something about her that scared me." My husband stopped washing the plate in his hands and looked at me intently. In his eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen before, recognition. "Lisa," he said in a very low voice, "there are things about Rachel's death that I never told you." My heart began to pound so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. Henry's words hit me like lightning. "What about Rachel's death?" I asked with a trembling voice. My husband sat heavily in one of the kitchen chairs, the same table where we had shared thousands of family meals, where Rachel used to do her homework, and where Damiana had always remained silent. Henry ran his hands over his face as if trying to erase the memories that had tormented him for 25 years. "The night Rachel died," he began in a broken voice, "Damiana wasn't in her room studying, like she told us. I saw her leave the house around 8. I followed her because something about her attitude worried me. She'd been very strange those days, more aggressive, more resentful." My husband paused, looking at his hands as if the terrible truth he had kept for so long was written on them. "I saw them arguing by the gorge," Henry continued. "Lisa, I heard them screaming horrible things at each other. My world began to spin. "What were they arguing about?" I whispered, even though part of me no longer wanted to know the answer. Henry looked up, and I saw tears in his eyes. Tears he hadn't even shed at our oldest daughter's funeral. "About the inheritance, Lisa." Damiana was furious because Rachel was the oldest, because according to family traditions, she would inherit most of our assets. But there was something more. Something about money that Rachel had found. "What money?" I asked, feeling the ground vanish beneath my feet. Henry sighed deeply before continuing. 3 days before she died, Rachel came to talk to me in the workshop. She had discovered that Damiana had been stealing money from the family savings account. Small amounts at first, but then larger sums. Rachel had proof. She'd been investigating for months. My mind refused to process what I was hearing. My youngest daughter, the one who had been so attentive after Rachel's death, the one who helped and cared for us, had been stealing from us since before her sister died. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I accused Henry, feeling the betrayal multiplied twofold. "Because when I got to the gorge that night, it was already too late. I saw Damiana standing next to Rachel's body. Our youngest daughter was trembling, crying, and repeating over and over, 'It was an accident! It was an accident!' She looked at me with those desperate eyes and begged me to help her. 'Dad,' she said, 'Rachel tripped when she was trying to hit me. I just defended myself and she lost her balance.' Tears ran down my cheeks uncontrollably. 'But you believed her,' I murmured, even though I already knew the answer. Henry nodded slowly, with an expression of guilt that had haunted him for decades. 'She was my daughter, Lisa. My youngest daughter was asking for my help. And Rachel was already dead. I couldn't bring one back to life by destroying the other. I thought it was really an accident, that Damiana had learned her lesson, that she would become a better woman after this.' 'And the stolen money?' I asked, needing to know every detail of this nightmare. Damiana promised she would pay it back little by little, that she had taken the money to invest in a business that had gone wrong. She swore she would never do something like that again. And I believed her, Lisa. God forgive me, but I believed her because I needed to believe my daughter wasn't a killer. I got up from the table, stumbling, holding onto the wall so I wouldn't fall. Everything I had believed about my family, about my surviving daughter, about the last 25 years of my life was a lie. "Did she pay the money back?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from the look on Henry's face. "Never," he replied. "In fact, she kept stealing small amounts that I pretended not to notice because confronting her would mean admitting I had covered up a murder. I became her accomplice, Lisa. Every time I stayed silent, every time I pretended not to see the bank accounts dwindle, I became more of her accomplice." The horrible reality began to take shape in my mind. "That's why she's so interested in controlling our finances now," I murmured. "It's not because she cares about us. It's because she wants to finish what she started 25 years ago." Henry nodded gravely. "And there's something else, Lisa. Something I just discovered a few weeks ago." "What else could there be?" I asked, feeling like my heart couldn't take any more revelations. Henry went to his desk and pulled out some papers he had been hiding under other documents. "I've been discreetly investigating Damiana's finances. Her carpentry business isn't doing as well as she wants us to believe. In fact, she's on the verge of bankruptcy. She owes more than $100,000 to several banks and suppliers." The papers trembled in my hands as I read the numbers. Damiana wasn't the successful woman she pretended to be. She was a desperate failure who had been living on lies and stolen money for decades. "Does Michael know all this?" I asked, remembering his warm smile and charming words. "I'm sure he does. I've noticed how he directs the conversations when they talk about our money, how he asks specific questions about our savings, the value of the house, our life insurance policies. They aren't innocent questions, Lisa. They are questions from someone calculating exactly how much our death is worth." That sentence chilled me to the bone. "Our death?" I repeated in a whisper. It was the first time I had considered that Damiana might want to cause us physical harm. Until that moment, I thought she just wanted to rob or cheat us. But if she had killed her own sister for money, what would stop her from killing her parents for the same reason? "Henry," I said, grabbing his hands, "we have to go to the police. We have to tell them the truth about Rachel and about what's happening now." But my husband shook his head with a look of hopelessness that broke my heart. "With what evidence, Lisa? I'm an accomplice to covering up a murder. If I talk now, I'll go to jail too. And besides, who's going to believe an old man of 65 who's been keeping this secret for 25 years? He was right. So what do we do? Just wait for her to kill us like she killed Rachel? "We're going to be very careful," Henry said, trying to sound more confident than he really was. "We're going to find a way to protect ourselves, to gather evidence to—" But his words were interrupted by the sound of the phone. It was Damiana. "Hi, Mom," she said with that sweet voice that now sounded sinister to me. "Michael and I were thinking, and we believe it would be beautiful to celebrate your 40th wedding anniversary with something special. How about we take you to those mountains you've always talked about next weekend? We could go on a family hike, take pictures, and have a perfect day together." My blood turned to ice. I looked at Henry, who had heard the conversation and had the same look of terror on his face. "That's a very sweet idea, sweetheart," I managed to reply in a trembling voice. "But let us think about it, and we'll get back to you tomorrow." After hanging up, Henry and I looked at each other in silence, knowing we had just received an invitation to our own execution. "The mountains," I murmured. "She's going to take us to the mountains to kill us and make it look like an accident." Henry nodded gravely, just like he did when he had told me about Rachel's death. That night, we didn't sleep a minute, holding each other in our bed, planning how we could save ourselves from our own daughter. The next few days were a nightmare of terror and pretense. Henry and I had to act as if nothing had happened when Damiana and Michael came to visit, smiling when they talked about the mountain trip, nodding when they excitedly told us they were going to spend time with family. But inside, every fiber of my being screamed with fear. I knew I was looking into the eyes of my eldest daughter's murderers, and that now they were planning to do the same to me and my husband. Michael arrived on Wednesday afternoon with a shopping bag and that radiant smile that now seemed like the grimace of a demon. "Lisa, dear," he said, hugging me with those arms that would soon push me to my death, "I bought some supplies for our mountain adventure. Cookies, water, fruit, everything we'll need for the picnic." He showed me the contents of the bag as if he were an excited child, but I could only think about how each of those items could be used to cover up our murder. "I also brought my new camera," he added, pulling out an expensive digital camera. "I want to capture every moment of this special day. They're going to be photos we'll treasure forever." The irony of his words made me sick. The only photo he would take would be of our broken bodies at the bottom of some cliff, if anyone ever found us. Damiana appeared behind him carrying a new hiking backpack. "Dad," she said to Henry with feigned enthusiasm, "I bought all the necessary equipment for a safe hike. Ropes, harnesses, lanterns, a first aid kit." Every word that came out of her mouth sounded like a cruel mockery. Safety equipment for planning our murders. The perversity of the situation made me dizzy. "Isn't it a bit dangerous for people our age?" I asked, trying to sound casual, while looking for any excuse to cancel the trip. "That's why we chose a very easy and safe trail," Damiana assured me. "It's a hike even kids can do. Plus, Michael and I will be there to take care of you the whole time." Yes, they would be there to take care of us until the exact moment they decided to push us off a cliff. That night, when they finally left, Henry and I sat in our living room, trembling. Not just from the cold, but from the absolute terror we had been holding back for hours. "We can't go," I said, grabbing his hands. "We just can't. We'll make up some excuse." "If we don't go," Henry replied in a grave voice, "they'll find another way to kill us. Maybe something that looks even more accidental, like a house fire or a robbery gone wrong. At least in the mountains, we know what they're going to try to do. His words had a terrible logic, but they didn't comfort me at all. So, what do you suggest? I asked, desperate to find some solution that would save our lives. Henry was thoughtful for a few minutes before answering. We're gonna go, but we're going to be prepared. I'm going to hide my cell phone and set it to record everything that happens. If we manage to survive, we'll have evidence. And if we don't, at least someone will know the truth. On Friday night, we could barely touch our dinner. We knew it might be our last meal together in our house, in that kitchen where we had shared so many happy moments when we were a real family. Henry reviewed his will one more time, making sure that if something happened to us, at least Damiana wouldn't get everything without there being some record of our suspicions. I wrote a letter, he confessed, pulling a sealed envelope from his desk. It's addressed to your sister Harriet. In it, I explain everything we know about Rachel's death and what we believe Damiana plans to do to us. I hid it in the place where we keep our important documents. If we don't return from this trip, at least she'll know where to look for the truth. That night we went to bed holding each other, whispering words of love that could be our last. If something happens to me, Henry said, I want you to know that these 40 years with you have been the best of my life. Despite everything, despite the mistakes and the secrets, I love you more than my own life. I cried in silence, memorizing the rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his body, the smell of his skin. Saturday dawned with a clear sky that seemed to mock our situation. Damiana arrived early, whistling a cheerful tune that chilled my blood. "Morning, lovebirds," she called from the front door. "Ready for your big adventure?" Michael appeared behind her, radiant as a groom on his wedding day, except this was a wedding with death. During breakfast, which we could barely eat, Damiana explained the route we would take in detail. "It's a beautiful trail," she said, spreading a map on the table. "It leads to a lookout where you can see the whole valley. These say the views are spectacular." Her eyes shone with an enthusiasm that seemed demonic. Of course, the views would be spectacular. They would be the last we would see in our lives. "The trail has some steep parts," Michael added, as if giving us useful tourist information, "but nothing that experienced hikers like you can't handle." His comment about our supposed hiking abilities sounded like a cruel joke. We were two 60-year-olds who barely walked through the park once in a while. As we loaded the car, I saw Damiana meticulously checking her backpack, making sure she had everything she needed for her plan. I saw ropes, a small shovel, and something that looked like a flare gun. "What's that for?" I asked, pointing to the gun. "For safety," she replied without missing a beat. "If we get lost or something goes wrong, we can send a distress signal." Of course, they would send a distress signal after pushing us off the cliff, so our bodies could be found and it would be confirmed that it was a tragic accident during a family hike. Everything was calculated. Every detail had been planned to make our murders look perfectly natural. The car ride to the mountains lasted 2 hours that felt like an eternity. Michael put on cheerful music and he and Damiana sang along as if we were really going on a fun family outing. Damiana drove carefully, obeying all the speed limits, stopping at every sign. She didn't want to risk an accident that would ruin her perfect plans. During the trip, Henry discreetly took my hand and activated the recording on his phone. Everything that happened from that moment on would be recorded. If we managed to survive, we would have proof. If not, at least the truth wouldn't die with us. When we finally arrived at the trailhead, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it would beat out of my chest. The place was beautiful. Tall trees, the sound of a nearby river, but for me, it had become the setting for my own execution. We began the hike slowly. The trail was narrow and covered with small stones that slipped under our boots. The air was crisp and smelled of pine and damp earth. Under other circumstances, it would have been a beautiful morning, the kind Henry and I used to dream about spending together in peace. But not that day. That day, every step felt like it was leading us closer to death. Damiana walked ahead, cheerful, humming an old song Rachel used to love, a detail that made my skin crawl. Michael followed behind Henry and me, his camera swinging from his neck. Every now and then, he'd stop to take pictures of the scenery. "Smile, Lisa," he called cheerfully at one point. "You're gonna love how this one turns out." I forced a smile, though every muscle in my body trembled with fear. Henry squeezed my hand gently. That silent pressure was the only thing keeping me from collapsing right there on the trail. After about an hour of walking, the trail began to climb steeply. Damiana slowed her pace and pointed to a rocky outcrop that overlooked the valley below. "There it is," she said, smiling whitely. "The lookout point. Isn't it gorgeous?" The place was indeed beautiful. Too beautiful. From there, you could see miles of green forest and, far below, the river glittering like silver under the sun. It was a perfect place for photos and for someone to accidentally fall. Michael opened his backpack and began setting up the picnic. He laid out a blanket, unpacked sandwiches, and poured juice into plastic cups. His calmness was terrifying. Every movement deliberate, controlled, as if you were performing a ritual. Henry and I sat down stiffly, pretending to enjoy the view. I tried to act natural, though my heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear their voices. "Do you remember," Damiana said suddenly, "when we came here once when I was little?" I froze. We had never been to that place before. She was lying. But why? "You were so scared of heights, Mom," she continued, smiling at me with a look that wasn't love. "You held on to Dad's arms so tightly he couldn't move." I forced a laugh. "That sounds like me," I said, my voice trembling. Michael chuckled softly. "You shouldn't be afraid now, Lisa. It's perfectly safe. Come on, I'll take a picture of the two of you by the edge, the best spot for photos." That was it, the signal. I looked at Henry. His face had turned pale, but he nodded slightly. He understood, too. We stood up, slowly, as if we were just two old people moving carefully. Michael gestured toward the edge of the cliff where the view was the most spectacular and the ground the most unstable. "Right there," he said, pointing just a few steps forward. Henry and I approached the edge. The wind hit our faces, strong and cold. My knees trembled. Below, the valley stretched endlessly, a deadly drop of more than 90 feet. "Perfect," Michael said behind us. "Now put your arms around each other." We did. Henry's grip around my shoulders tightened until it hurt. I felt his breath close to my ear, whispering words that made my blood freeze. "Lisa," he murmured. "When I say now, drop to the ground." Before I could ask why, I heard a faint scrape of boots on gravel, Michael's step approaching, and then a sudden shove. The force was brutal. My body lurched forward, but before I could fall, Henry yanked me back with all his strength and threw himself sideways, dragging me with him. We hit the ground hard, rolling away from the edge. The world exploded in screams. "Dad!" Damiana shrieked. "What are you doing?" But I knew that scream wasn't of fear. It was fury. Henry groaned beside me, clutching his ribs. I could taste blood in my mouth. "Stay down," he whispered. "Play dead." I didn't understand until I heard Michael's voice. Calm, cold, and terrifyingly composed. "Damiana," he said. "It's fine. They slipped. Help me check if they're breathing." Through half-closed eyes, I saw them approach slowly. Damiana's face was contorted with panic or rage. Michael crouched beside Henry and pressed 2 fingers to his neck, pretending to check for a pulse. Then I heard him mutter, almost in a whisper, "Still breathing." Damiana clenched her jaw. "Then finish it." Before I could react, Michael raised a heavy rock from the ground. I wanted to scream, but Henry's hand tightened around mine. His eyes met mine, full of desperation. And then, the sound of a branch snapping behind them. A voice shouted from the trees, "Hey, everything okay over there?" 2 hikers appeared at the top of the path. Michael froze, still holding the rock. Damiana turned pale. She cried suddenly, switching to her sweetest tone. "Oh my God! My parents fell! Please help us!" The hikers ran toward us. Michael quickly dropped the rock and pretended to check Henry's pulse again. "They tripped near the edge," he said breathlessly. "We need help, fast." One of the hikers pulled out his phone and called for emergency services, while the other knelt beside us. "Don't move, ma'am," he said to me gently. "The ambulance is on its way." I just nodded weakly, still pretending to be unconscious. From the corner of my eye, I saw Henry's phone half hidden under a rock. The red light was blinking. It was still recording. Michael and Demiana moved away, whispering to each other in hushed, urgent tones. "We have to finish this," I heard Demiana hiss. "Not now," Michael snapped. "They'll suspect." Minutes later, we heard sirens in the distance. Paramedics arrived quickly and began to check us over. Demiana and Michael stood nearby, pale and trembling, not from guilt, but from frustration. Henry and I were placed on stretchers. When the paramedics asked what happened, I looked straight at my daughter. "They tried to kill us," I said clearly. Demiana's face went white. "What? Mom, how could you—" But she never finished her sentence. Henry reached into his pocket and showed the officer the phone. "Everything's on here," he said weakly. "Every word they said." The officer took the phone immediately. Within minutes, both Demiana and Michael were handcuffed, their faces frozen in shock. "Dad, Mom, you can't do this to us," Demiana screamed as they dragged her away. "We're family." I closed my eyes. "No, Demiana," I whispered. We were family. Henry and I spent 3 weeks in the hospital. My ribs were fractured, his arm was broken, but we were alive. The police later told us the recording on Henry's phone captured everything, from the planning to the moment they pushed us. The case made national news. Couple survives murder attempt by their own daughter. When they asked if I wanted to visit Demiana in prison, I said no. The daughter I once loved had died the same day as Rachel. I just hadn't known it until now. Now, back in our quiet home, Henry and I sit on the porch each evening. The sound of the wind through the trees reminds me of that day on the mountain. Sometimes, when the sun sets, I still hear Rachel's laughter in my memories. Light, kind, innocent, and I whisper to her, "It's over now, my love. Justice has been done." Henry takes my hand and squeezes it gently. We survived the mountain. But a part of our hearts will forever remain at the edge of that cliff, where truth, after 25 long years, finally caught up with us.